So does the Hollywood rule, is it real that like, if you come here and you get married, you instantly get citizenship?
Oh, no.
What's the
was it the Gerard Depardieu movie Green Card?
Well, I'm
Terrible
thinking of that, but I'm actually thinking of the Sandra Bullock movie where she forces Ryan Reynolds to marry her so she doesn't get deported. But in Hollywood style, like I don't want to get deported back to Canada.
I mean,
that must be so bad for you.
Yeah, I mean, Hollywood never gets it right. It's kind of I joke with my colleagues about like one day I'll leave this world behind and I'll just be like a consultant.
Right.
And Hollywood and just be like, that's not right.
That's not really.
That's actually distractingly wrong.
Welcome to Above the Legal Limit. I'm your host, Justin Chopin, business owner, lawyer, dad, world's best husband, traveler, and adventure seeker. On this podcast, we mix business with pleasure. We'll dive into growth strategies, entrepreneurial adventures, the business of law, and prove that business isn't boring. So let's get ready because we are going above the legal limit. Welcome to another episode of Above the Legal Limit. Very special guest here today, Erin Hebert. Thank you so much for coming.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Justin.
Tell our viewers, millions of viewers around the world, tell us what you do.
So I'm an immigration lawyer. I practice exclusively immigration law. I'm a senior attorney at the firm Ware Immigration, owned by a friend of the pod, Elaine Kimbrell. And within our firm, I lead the team that we practice family-based immigration, removal defense, which you may or may not hear referred to as deportation. We can get to that later, but removal defense litigation and humanitarian-based immigration.
So I love talking to other lawyers that do things that I don't know anything about. So I always think it's fascinating because as a lawyer, we're a little bit full of shit, and I'm like an expert in pretty much everything, but I know nothing about anything, except for immigration, where I truly just have no idea. Like I went to a CLE not that long ago, and they got into sort of the nitty and gritty of it, and I was fascinated. It was like blew my mind. I was like, I had no idea there were all these regs about how this works. So always excited to hear and learn more about immigration, which is a hot topic right now.
For sure.
What kind of immigration do you primarily focus in?
Sure. So within my team, immigration is incredibly complicated, incredibly complex. It's changing all the time. But our firm, we do full service. But my sort of niche area is anything family-based. So family members, U.S. citizens or permanent residents petitioning for relatives who are foreign nationals. Removal defense, so people who are in the process of being removed or ICE is trying to actively remove them and practicing at the immigration court in terms of defending those individuals, but also humanitarian applications. And so that can be your asylums, that can also be UNT visas, which are created for victims of criminal activity in the United States and trafficking, as well as applications under the Violence Against Women Act. So people who have been abused by a U.S. citizen or permanent relative, spouse, or parent, generally.
Okay. So, and now deportation, what did you call it?
Removal, technically.
Removal defense.
Since 1996, technically deportation doesn't exist in the United States. It's all removal.
Like one of those political correct terms. Like it's not deportation.
Right.
It's just a quick and expedient removal from where you are currently.
Well, it's the Holocaust, right?
Right. Did you get to pick where you go? Because if I get removed, I definitely have like a hot list where be like, London for sure. Like I love London, love Paris. Maybe an island somewhere like
sure,
not a
nice.
Guantanamo Bay Island, but maybe like another island.
Yeah, it would be nice, but unfortunately, no. It's actually part of the initial hearing. Usually in a removal case, is you have to sort of answer the pleadings that ICE has lodged against you. Are you a citizen or national of the United States? No. Are you a citizen or national of this other country? Are you present in the United States with overstaying a visa or having entered without being present without admission. But the last sort of thing we do in pleadings is, would you like to designate a country of removal? Nice. And so it's Traditionally, it's either the country that you're a native or
Usually,
citizen
where you're
of.
from, right? Usually like Antarctica.
Exactly, right, like stateless.
I hear the cruise is nice.
Yeah, I mean, I've had several stateless individuals, and so there's just no country that will accept them. And especially if you're applying for a humanitarian benefit, like for example asylum, we typically decline to designate a country because my clients are unable or unwilling to avail themselves of the protection of the country from which they are fleeing harm. And so ICE or DHS can then, the judge will say like, okay, you declined to designate, and they'll ask ICE, and ICE will say, request, my clients of Honduran background, request Honduras, Your Honor, and the judge will so designate.
Okay. So me being ignorant on this issue, so if you are seeking asylum from Guatemala, right?
Sure.
And we often hear this, we're like, if I go back, they're gonna kill me. This is something that I've heard before, and we get a lot of, because we're advertising program, we get a lot of traffic coming through for all sorts of things I can't help with. So I see a lot of these leads come through for things like this too. They're always very sad, and they're typically in written format because language barriers and stuff like that.
Sure.
So I'm reading these. So I'm just thinking, practically speaking, okay, I can't go back to Guatemala. Can you go to Panama, or is Panama gonna be like, no, bro, you don't live here?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of an emerging area. Is like other countries, perhaps for trade or diplomatic reasons, maybe being willing to accept people who are being removed from the United States. I mean, it's kind of a human rights issue. I think it's going to be a really interesting emerging topic of international law coming in the next administration, particularly in terms of if the United States is trying to remove somebody and they're not able for some reason to remove them to their country. This is something that we've seen a lot with
the Tom Hanks movie.
Kind of,
right?
The terminal, yeah. But I mean, we see this with Vietnamese refugees who, for some reason, lost refugee status, and the U.S. was trying to remove them. And then Vietnam would not accept them, right? If your country will not accept you for some reason, or the government's not able to get a travel document for you, there's no way to actually send you back or send you abroad to any country. And
so where do you go?
This is kind of the thing, right?
Like you basically you're just in holding. Like, are you sitting like in a jail cell?
For a lot of people, it was. I've had several Vietnamese clients in this position, Palestinians as well. That if you don't have a country that will take you, if you have a removal order, ICE is allowed to detain you civilly for a certain period of time, and then after that, if there's no removal in sight that is reasonably foreseeable, they kind of have to release you or figure out what's a reasonable accommodation to. Because it's just not, you cannot civilly detain a person indefinitely per the Constitution, in theory, right? And so that's
We've
something
gotten pretty good at it, but
yeah.
Which brings us to, you were talking about Guantanamo, which I'm pretty sure has detained individuals indefinitely since the Bush administration, the first one, the second one. Okay, well, and before we got started, we were talking about this. There's big headline that a plane is headed for Costa Rica with 200 people aboard. But we don't know. We don't know who's on the plane. Costa Rica's agreed to take it. Take them, I should say. So what happens when they get there? Costa Rica just gets involved.
I suppose you're going to have to ask the government of Costa Rica. I'm actually not familiar with this. That was happening.
I'm a headline jumper.
Sure.
Which is why I have no details on this. Because did you read the article? I'm like, no, I didn't read the article. I'm like most Americans. I read headlines, and it's going to have to be like a really compelling headline to get me to get the rest of the article.
Sure.
It's going to have to be good.
Sure.
And unfortunately, like many Americans, I'm just as bad. It becomes white noise, right?
Sure.
So if you see something every day, you're just, you're like, oh, there's another one, right? Because there was also one, it was, Mexico wasn't going to accept, or was it Mexico? I think it was Mexico was not going to accept, inbound flights. And so,
there was a story.
Trump
it was like right after inauguration.
No, it wasn't. It was Colombia. Colombia wasn't going to do it.
There was
so
a
Trump
military
imposed an immediate tariff, and
right.
they said, "Oh,
it was Colombians.
Okay, fine. We'll take it. We have the space."
And my understanding was that it was objection to it being a military plane.
Is that what it was?
That's my understanding of it, but I could be wrong. That's the thing, is that like with all of the changes that have happened since day one, it's almost like you're trying to drink from a fire hose,
right?
And so it's really difficult to sort of digest, retain, and be able to like meaningfully talk about a lot of the stuff that we've seen.
Which is interesting because the new theories are that the fire hose is intentional. right? So if you bombard people with 10,000 different issues, most people you can only tackle one at a time, and if you attempt to tackle all 10,000, you become crazy, or you sound crazy. Let's talk about the family aspect of it, because I know that's also a big issue with sort of the new administration's position on birthright citizenship. And I assume that there's an interplay between when you talk about family issues with this birthright.
Sure.
So when you say the family, what do you mean by that?
So family immigration.
Family immigration, right?
So yeah. So I think the two questions there. Like family immigration would be under U.S. immigration law, U.S. citizens can petition for or like sponsor for permanent resident status their spouses, their parents, their children of any age, and their siblings. Now, within that divide, there is sort of like, some are given preference and some are given very low preference. And so the waiting lists are, 20 years long, 25 years long. Permanent residents of the United States, so green card holders, can sponsor their spouses, their minor children, and their adult unmarried children. And so, and again, same preference sort of rules apply, where there's kind of a waiting list depending on what country you're from, how long the wait is, et cetera.
So does the Hollywood rule, is it real that if you come here and you get married, you instantly get citizenship?
Oh, no.
What's the
was it the Gerard Depardieu movie Green Card?
Well, I'm thinking of that, but I'm actually thinking of the Sandra Bullock movie where she forces Ryan Reynolds to marry her so she doesn't get deported. But in Hollywood style, I don't want to get deported back to Canada. I mean, that must be so bad for you.
Yeah, I mean, Hollywood never gets it right. It's kind of a joke with my colleagues about one day I'll leave this world behind and I'll just be like a consultant.
Right.
And Hollywood and just be like, that's not right.
That's not really.
That's actually distractingly wrong.
So if Sandra Bullock marries Ryan Reynolds, so then what happens?
Well, it kind of depends, right? Because depends on Sandra Bullock's immigration history. It depends on Sandra Bullock's criminal history. So let's say Sandra Bullock last entered with a visa and Ryan Reynolds is a U.S. citizen. If they get married, then they can, typically, not giving legal advice.
Sure,
but
sure. If you're listening to this and you are Sandra Bullock, and I know you have the house in New Orleans.
Sandra,
we know about you. Call us.
I will give you immigration advice. But no, so let's say Sandra Bullock's character enters with a visa, marries a U.S. citizen. They can then, Ryan Reynolds could sponsor her for permanent resident status, and she could apply for permanent resident status.
Gotcha.
And in the case of a U.S. citizen, they could do it concurrently. But I mean, that process, it's like 100 pages of forms, a lot of evidence. They've got to prove what we call the bona fides of the marriage, that they actually have a legitimate marriage. They have an intent to establish a life together.
How do you prove a bona fide marriage?
Government loves a paper trail.
Man.
So it's a moving target, right? There's no one right way to have a marriage, but they love to see jointly filed taxes, lease agreements in both names, bank account statements in both names, utility bills in both names. That's kind of like the regulation has all of that.
My wife and I would never be married.
Yeah,
because she doesn't do any of this shit. I have to do it all, right? So if something happens to me, my family's just going to basically have all the utilities turned off and get evicted. The bank, sewage and water boards are like, well, I know who Justin is. We don't know who you are. You've never been in our system ever since you've moved here. So, all right, well, maybe I'm not even married.
But I mean, the gold standard is a birth certificate for children born to the marriage. So
I have a couple of those.
I think you've got a couple of gold standards. Yeah.
2 of those. No one can find them, but they're there.
I think the idea is it's hard to fake having a kid together.
It is, especially ours. Yeah, there's no question about it. All right, well, hey, I think that's interesting. Well, I always hoped it would be more like Hollywood, where you instantly are like, and now, by the powers of Hollywood, you are a citizen of the United States of America. I didn't realize that you still had to go through this application process. And
you bring up a good point, which is sort of like, and that's the legal immigration system. And I think there's a really interesting kind of people don't really talk about it being a dichotomy, but there really is one between, the legal immigration system and, undocumented immigration, and how that affects other aspects politically, economically, et cetera. And, the legal immigration system was one that our current president really tried to dismantle during his first term. And so made it a lot harder for people to sponsor family, made it a lot harder for companies to sponsor foreign workers. And so like even during the what we might call the good times, that process, Sandra Bullock's process, could take a year or more. Before she gets, even a temporary permanent resident card or green card. So, I mean, that the process, the legal immigration process, where the laws provide a way for you to apply for and receive a green card or permanent resident status, it's not automatic. It's actually quite complicated. It can be very long. While the case is pending, a year or more, executive orders drop from the sky, and
it could change anything on a dime, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it could change the way that for example, one of the things that was happening during the first Trump administration was the public charge rule. So Ryan Reynolds has to, when he's sponsoring Sandra Bullock, has to show that she's not going to be a public charge if she's accorded permanent resident status. So he's got to show.
What do you mean by a public charge?
Great question.
Like she's not going to cost us any money, or she's not
not going to apply for any sort of public benefits that Ryan Reynolds can support her above the poverty line.
Okay.
And so that was, how that was interpreted was something that they tried to change dramatically during the first Trump term. It was then rescinded by Biden. It's something that it hasn't happened yet, but we think it might be coming. So, and typically the U.S. citizen sponsor just needs to show they earn enough money to support them. But, during the Trump 1.0, the public charge rule, there was this crazy form. I still have nightmares about it. It's called the 944. It was 20 pages long. We would have to submit a ream of paper evidence, like credit reports, bank account statements, things like that. And so that's the kind of stuff that, even going through the legal immigration system, even, doing things the quote right way, puts a substantial burden on people, and thus dramatically increases processing times. And so, the service that the government is supposed to provide to people, you pay the fee, you fill out the form, you are eligible to receive this benefit. It's very, very frustrating, and it's very,
right.
Opaque. It's very difficult to navigate on your own. And so, I personally don't think that people should have to hire a lawyer for something as simple as a marriage-based green card where there's no criminal history. But I find
have to hire a lawyer for half the shit we do.
Yeah.
And I'm a lawyer, so when I say that, it really, you should. Yeah. People of America, listen, you should not have to hire a lawyer and a CPA to know what taxes you owe.
I completely agree.
You shouldn't have to have a lawyer for some of these things. Mm-hmm. I should be out of a job, and doing something else. I don't know, working at a Starbucks. I'd love it. It'd be like the old days,
Exactly.
Slinging espressos, I'd start smoking again and finally get that tattoo, But here we are, defending. Well, so speaking of defending, I love it. You refer to a Trump 1.0, and it's funny. I like it. So during Trump 1.0, all of AmLaw, well, not all of it, but a lot of AmLaw sort of rallied together and were, basically providing pro bono services. I remember all the big firms were sending people to airports. Do you think that that's going to happen this time? Do you think that it's people are exhausted from it? And I haven't heard anything yet, right? I mean, the big New York firms aren't sending people to airports right now.
Yeah, I mean, there was the dramatic. I think that during 1.0 we're seeing shock and awe at the beginning of both administrations, but it's being deployed differently. I think the biggest thing during 1.0 was obviously the Muslim ban, the travel bans, and those restrictions, and that was really. I think that really ignited something in the American people and the legal system. We're all wildly unpopular. We haven't really seen anything that divisive, or at least that has sparked that sort of attention yet, which surprises me in a way. I mean, I know teachers and nurses who are very, very concerned about ICE showing up at the school or the hospital to try to separate families, arrest people. That was one of the big things that it made a lot of waves in the community, but I haven't seen it really get as much national attention as I think it deserves. Is the rescission of the Safe Places memo, which was kind of a policy during Biden that ICE would not try to come arrest people in churches. places of worship, schools, hospitals, public spaces, because the idea is that people should avail themselves of those opportunities. And when people are afraid of doing that, it's a suppression on speech, worship, ability of children to seek an education. I mean, even U.S. citizen children who have undocumented parents, scared of going to school, scared of going to church. And that's just, there's something fundamentally un-American about that.
Yeah.
And that's something that that I know personally, a lot of teachers, nurses, people who are involved in religious communities who have already seen the impact of that. And I'm surprised that it hasn't gotten more attention, I guess.
Well, so we see that in personal injury side as well. It's not uncommon. If you're not an American citizen and you get tagged by an 18-wheeler and you're in the hospital, I mean, even you're still entitled to compensation, right? So you don't even have to look at it from an immigration perspective. You could just say, you're a French citizen and you came to America, we'll use the countries everyone likes. You're British and you have a lovely accent. And you have a fun, quaint job, you sell books, right? So Hugh Grant's in America, and he gets,
we're in Notting Hill now.
Right. Yeah. Where he's in an Uber and gets rear-ended by a drunk driving 18-wheeler, right? Okay, there's your perfect scenario. So he would be entitled to file a lawsuit against the 18-wheeler. And the reason I give that ridiculous, rendition is because the average person wants to see it the other way. It's an undocumented immigrant crosses the border and then they get hurt and they want to sue and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. Well, just forget all that shit for a second and just understand that this is something that'd be available to even the people that you like. You like the way they look. You like the way they talk. But we have this issue where there are some judges on the bench whose position is, well, if you bring this case into my court, they have the opinion that they have an ethical obligation to alert ICE. And so it's just going to happen. And so, we were just having this discussion maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago about a pretty substantial case and whether or not it was going to get removed to federal court and which judge it would be allotted to. And then, if it gets allotted to that judge, we could have our client deported. Well, shoot, we don't want that either. That's not what they hired us to do. And so trying to navigate those issues, even on the PI side, is really challenging, especially since I don't know anything about immigration work, right? So I'm just I don't know. Have you considered getting married to someone here before we file suit? I'm kidding, but.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, though, is there is this weird idea that has sort of permeated our consciousness that if you get married, it's all going to be fine, and it's really not. The Sandra Bullock example is the easiest, most clean cut, maybe you don't even need a lawyer thing, but for a person who entered the United States without a visa, the process is wildly different. It can take 7 years based on current processing times to even, go get permanent resident status. They're usually required to leave the United States to do it. And so it's one of those things where when you encounter somebody with a legal problem who also has an immigration issue, it's kind of interesting because immigration attorneys usually only do immigration. And so you say you don't know anything about immigration. I don't know anything about any other area of the law. If my cousin's getting divorced, I'm just I don't know, good luck.
Yeah.
But this is why I think it's important to have relationships with other legal professionals so that you can sort of help work on many problems at once. I mean, many of the times when I have undocumented clients, I sort of see that our office and our wonderful paralegals, our wonderful support staff, we're because this is a vulnerable population, they might not have access to, mental health services in the same way. They might not have the same access to the medical system. And so we sort of become a resource coordinator for them, which is, again, happy to do it, but it's also I didn't go to social work school. I have a hard time.
We also have that problem. I also don't know what to say to people because I find, social services are lacking for all of us in a lot of ways. And, one of the big things with personal injury is understanding the world of Medicaid and Medicare. And it's not, they don't teach you that shit in law school. And it's not easy and it is complicated. And so a lot of times our clients, we'll ask them like, are you on Medicaid? And they have no idea.
Right.
They truly, that was like, well, you don't,
Right.
which makes my life a little harder because, right, if you don't know, like if you don't know, I definitely don't know. So let's break it down. Like what are some ways, do you have private health insurance? And you're like,
For
no.
sure.
And I'm like, well, I don't know. Okay. If you don't know, then you definitely don't have it. So let's work our way back, But, and we see this, a lot with social services, right? After Obama, the understanding was, well, everybody's got healthcare now because of Obamacare. And that's really also not true.
Yeah.
There's still plenty of clients that walk in the door who still do not have Medicaid or Medicare. So I can imagine, right, with also the nationality issue, the language barrier issues, that just becomes increasingly more difficult to navigate.
Sure. And immigration always adds an extra layer on top of that.
Right.
Even if, it's a naturalized U.S. citizen, right, that they might face language barriers or like cultural barriers to access things that they're entitled to. But I mean, when you add, the immigration issue to it, even permanent residents, most permanent residents are not eligible for Medicaid or Medicare for like 5 years, or most other public benefits. So it's so especially for like undocumented folks, it's even harder to access basic health care.
Look, it's hard to access health care if you're not a citizen, no matter where you are.
Sure.
I was in Italy in college, and I had come down with like, most likely was either strep or tonsillitis, and I have to go to a doctor. I do not speak Italian. This doctor really did not speak English, but we were able to like pantomime our way through it. And very quickly, I found myself like laying on a bed without a shirt on. And I thought, well, this is very strange because I've never taken my shirt off for someone to look down my throat before, or like in my nose, in my ears.
Not a typical ENT experience.
And this is peculiar. And then I many years later meet my wife, and she was also in Europe. And she also had a similar ailment, and we were both laughing. She had the exact same experience. She was like, they were like, all right, you've got to take your shirt off first. I really, that's the first step in the process of getting you well. I just remember sitting there and I'm like, really wish I could speak Italian.
There's no other way to know.
This would be really helpful if I could be like, wait, what? Are you sure? So, well, how do you think in the next administration, what changes do you anticipate seeing on more of the corporate side of immigration?
Yeah, I mean, it's not my expertise, but I mean, our firm does handle a lot of it. One of the things that we saw before inauguration, like over the holidays, was this huge dust up over H-1B visas. The president had like a lot of rhetoric around restricting and heightening scrutiny on the H-1B program, which is for professionals and professional workers. Temporary visas, initially for 3 years, can be up to 6, and that's generally the pathway to getting, an employer to sponsor you for a green card. So that was a big dust up. So the president or the incoming president announces that he wants to make this much more difficult for people. And then, kind of the tech bros, like the CEOs were just like, no, wait a minute.
No, I really want those
I
people,
actually depend on foreign workers.
I don't think a lot of people in America realize that.
Yeah.
I don't think that a lot of Americans realize when we talk about immigration, only one portion of the conversation is what you're seeing on the news. And there's this other side of highly skilled, highly educated, highly trained physicians, engineers,
professors, researchers,
scientists.
Yeah, doing really, really valuable work that's like benefiting the country, benefiting, medical breakthroughs, scientific breakthroughs, environmental, meeting environmental challenges. Yeah, I mean, we work with a lot of those individuals.
And
I mean,
right?
I don't as much, but our firm does. And so it's really interesting to see, the rhetoric around immigration sort of not really acknowledge that that's a really valuable part of our country.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see. I don't. We don't want those. I would think. I would think these are people that we want to have here, but I don't know. What do I know?
Yeah. I mean, it's weird, right? Like you don't get into this field. You don't become an immigration lawyer if you think immigration is bad. And so, like at least not for me. And so for me, I have a hard time wrapping my mind around the anti-immigration rhetoric. I mean, for me, I have a background in international relations, political science. And so for me, when I think about immigration, I think about demographically, immigration is the reason that we are not falling off a population cliff like Japan, Korea, many European countries.
Yeah.
Because of levels of immigration, but also the children that immigrants have that are U.S. citizens, like bringing it back to birthright citizenship. That is the reason that we're still sort of like flourishing. Jobs create jobs, right? So when you have people who are working in a professional capacity or who are, running a corner store, like that is jobs, and like those jobs create other jobs for U.S. workers. It like lifts the economy. And so, I mean, the anti-immigrant rhetoric, it has never really made sense to me, and I struggle to really wrap my head around it.
Hey, I'm 100% with you, actually.
Yeah.
I agree. So we were talking about this last night. One of the earlier clients we had back in the old days when we were just trying to figure things out was like a Tulane student. He was from, and I recognize this is an entire continent, so don't jump on me. He's from Africa. I do not recall where in Africa he was actually from.
Quite a lot of countries.
It's a lot of countries. They're all bordering each other, and I also get confused, even having been there. But I don't really remember where it was in Africa. It was not North Africa. It was not South Africa, and it was not Tanzania. Those are the ones I know. But he was like a Tulane student. He got injured. It was like a car accident. The case, there were some legal hurdles for us that had nothing to do with immigration. There was a rental truck in there that like made everything more complicated than it needed to be. This case went on forever. We eventually get it resolved, and the algorithm of social media being what it is, the powerful tool that it is, like broke into my phone and was like, hey, I know that in 2017 you have an email with this guy, so I'm going to suggest that y'all become friends. I'm like, creepy. But he just graduated law school from Tulane. And I think it was Zimbabwe is where he's from, because I remember looking at it last night. And I sent it to my partner, Mike, because I was like, you're not going to believe this. James, ubiquitous name, graduated law school from Tulane. And we were genuinely, happy for him and glad to see that. But it really points to what you're saying. This is somebody who, I don't know his backstory. I never asked because it didn't really matter. But jobs create jobs. He is now a lawyer who can serve a function, both for the United States as well as for the city of New Orleans, state of Louisiana. Maybe he'll go out there and start his own law firm.
Right.
And then he will employ people, right? So I started my own law firm.
Right.
I didn't have any employees when I started. I wasn't really contributing much to society. But now, look.
Young lawyers, it's a struggle.
Right. I started with nothing. I was a defense lawyer. I started this thing, and now we've got 25 employees, and they all have kids. And so it's like we're not just supporting, a few people. It's, she's got 3 kids, he's got 2 kids, or everyone's got. So we're supporting families here. And we're paying a lot of taxes, all the taxes, and we're providing health insurance, right? And so there is benefit to all these things. It's not just one thing. It's not just one person. So I agree with you. I've now also never understood anti-immigration rhetoric. The sort of fundamental nature of an American is that, barring only a couple of us, myself excluded, none of us were really born here, right? Like my ancestors are fairly new. We're all within we were all turn of the century from France and Ireland, right? So we were just regular old, poor people. My great-grandfather grew up in a farm in south of France near Spain. And on the other side, my great-grandparents were poor, farmers, most likely in Ireland. And they came here and, but that is the essence of America.
Right.
Putting it a different way, I've often said, I think one of the reasons that makes America great is I think there has to be some sort of genetic mutation that makes someone say, I'm going to leave everything I have behind. Everything, my family, my land, my crops, my job,
my language, my culture.
I'm going to leave all this shit behind and get on a boat that may or may not make it to get to a place that I don't know anything about, that I've never seen. There's no movie. I haven't seen it in the movies. I don't know shit about this place, and you know, and I'm gonna just figure it out. I don't know. I think that's something great because I think that really I think there's just like this genetic hardwire of where we just view things differently and we're all different. And I think that's one of the things that makes our culture rich. I think it's one of the things that makes us a successful nation is our continued influx of people from different cultures. And you know, there's the Japanese immigration, there's the Irish immigration, there's the French. And New Orleans is the best place you could look at. It's like New York, right? It's this intense Italian influence, and then this people don't realize the intense Irish influence here because it's sort of this. You know, it's under subtext, right. You know. But I think that's what makes us great. And immigration is the tool by which it happens.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, I think we're a country of like great duality when it comes to immigration. I think that, you know, if you look at in the same like span of 6 years, we're a country that, you know, dedicated the Statue of Liberty, perhaps the most iconic American symbol. But within a few years of that, you know, the Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? And so it's immigration is such an interesting, it's always, I won't say it's always been political, but it has often been a political football or like politically expedient to blame whatever problem we're facing on immigration.
Sure.
And so, you know, I mean, I think which kind of was the point you're getting at, you know, a lot of those of us who have European ancestry that we sort of have, or I know a lot of people who have it, sort of have this idea that like, well, you know, my ancestors did it the right way. Right, they came legally. They came through Ellis Island, right? But I mean, if you look at what actually Ellis Island was about, they didn't have a visa. They just sort of showed up.
They were just and they were wrote your name down.
Yeah,
you know, that wasn't
exactly. They had a doctor sort of like, "Do you have tuberculosis? No, cool. Welcome to America." And that's not the case. And that was, you know, the law has sort of changed, and it is also sort of like redrawn the lines on the map. I mean, like there's this like. In a lot of like Chicano culture, there's sort of this idea that like the border crossed them, right? They were, you know, they found themselves to be American, but all of a sudden because there's this border now, they're separated from like extended family and stuff like that. And so I mean, I agree with you. I think there's something very fundamental to the American experience of, you know, of leaving it all behind and seeking to build something. And I think that, you know, I didn't vote for the man, but George W. Bush, he was one of the last sort of Republican proponents of immigration. He recognized that immigrants disproportionately serve in the military, that they are disproportionately entrepreneurial, that they sort of disproportionately are engaged in, you know, their communities and their churches and their places of worship, which are all, you know, sort of held up as the highest American ideal. And so, you know, to see it swing so dramatically in the public eye of, you know, villainizing what is definitionally, you know, people of many cultures, many countries, many languages, and sort of globbing it all into like, this is bad for America. It's really, it's disheartening to see, and it also doesn't make sense
Everybody
to me.
needs a target, and it's easy to marginalize somebody who sounds different, who may have a language barrier. You know, when we talk about entrepreneurship and business ownership, we often refer to the immigrant as the model, right? So when we talk about it, you live like an immigrant, which means, you know, start small and save for the next generation. So we talk about that a lot in the law firm. You know, with some of the older lawyers, like, well, we never had to do this, and we never got the benefit of that. And I was like, that's because we were building something for the next generation. So these younger lawyers that come in, yeah, they get all the best, you know, software and staff and all that. That's because we operate our business like immigrants. I mean, it's the metaphor that we use for building the business. So it's interesting to hear you say it because you're right. I mean, that the immigrant model is you come over and they're by and large entrepreneurs, and maybe not for the reasons people think. You know, maybe it's because it's harder for them to get a job, and so they have no choice. But it doesn't matter. And yeah, they build and they are sending their children to college. Because it's important to them that their children have a better life that they have, and expand the business and things like that. So I agree with you. I mean, it's you know, I think it is unique to the American experience, but there's always going to be a class of people who are being marginalized, and throughout history, we can see, you know, the immigrant. I mean, the Irish were treated like dirt. You know, God knows how many Irish are buried under the Hoover Canal. You know, and as well as the Hoover Dam, I should say, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Italians, right? I mean, I don't know that any. I guess the British. Nobody in America, was against the British. They had
famously.
Yeah, only like
famously only fought 2 wars.
50. Only 15 people left from the Mayflower, and they made the rules. So, all right, well, I'm getting this because I'm offending the British. And they're like, God damn it, Justin. You had one rule. No, but thank you so much for coming on the show. It was wonderful to meet you. If any of our viewers out there are experiencing some of these issues, how can they find you?
Great. So, we at our firm, I offer like complimentary screening calls because so much of what I see is, is this really an immigration question? Is this something that I can help you with or not? And so, if you call the firm, we can set you up for a complimentary screening call. If it looks like it's something that I can help you with, I'm happy to set up for a consult so we can talk about, here's what we can do, here's, the terms of representation, et cetera. But so call the office. Our numbers.
Where Immigration?
Where Immigration.
Where,
yeah.
W-A-R.
W-A-R-E.
Y'all used to have the billboard in the airport, and I was telling Elaine, I was so sad that y'all didn't do it.
Yeah.
But then I was looking at getting a billboard in the airport, during the Super Bowl, and I was like, oh, we're not doing that. Once they sent those rates, I was like, I think we're all right. We'll just that's why if you're in the airport and you notice a lot of ads for the airport, that's why.
Exactly. Makes sense.
Congratulations, you're here. So, hey, thank you very much for coming.
My pleasure.
Erin Hebert, Where Immigration.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Thanks for having me on, Justin.
Thank you for joining me today on Above the Legal Limit. If you enjoyed the show and you want to hear more about business and law, hit that subscribe button. If you didn't like the show, keep it to yourself. Remember, there's no limit to what we can achieve. We will see you next week. Until then, even though we're above the legal limit, let's drive safely. Cheers, everyone.